One of the reasons why I think Batman has the strongest roster of villains is the fact that almost all of them represent elements of the human condition. Love, loneliness, identity, fear, insecurity, the list goes on. One of the villains I find the most fascinating is Two-Face, and I've talked about him a lot in my videos, particularly how he was presented in Batman the Animated Series. Despite being one of Batman's most well-known and visually distinct foes, Two-Face has had comparatively few appearances outside of the comic books. There were tentative plans to include him in the 1960s Adam West starring TV show, but he was deemed to be too frightening. This is partly because of his gruesome origin story. Dashing District Attorney Harvey Dent was the victim of an acid attack in open court. The subsequent damage to half of his face caused him to spiral, splitting his mind in two. From that point on, he became obsessed with duality and chance, making every decision with the flip of his trademark double-headed coin. If you think about it, Two-Face wasn't the first villain who was brought about by acid. The Joker fell into a massive tank of the stuff, although I guess his disfigurement was far more friendly looking. So because his appearance was deemed to be too frightening for younger audiences, he wouldn't appear outside of the comic books until Batman the Animated Series aired in 1992. Their transformative take on the character would help him become one of the most enduring Batman villains. Since he made that debut, he's gone on to appear in 2 feature films, several direct-to-DVD animated features, and almost every major Batman cartoon. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How Batman the Animated Series redefined this character, and how their version has cast a long shadow over the other animated series since then. Over the course of the video, we're going to talk about the most prominent versions of Two-Face, starting with 1992's Batman the Animated Series, as well as 1997's New Batman Adventures, 2013's Beware the Batman, 2020's Harley Quinn, and 2024's Batman Cape Crusader. We'll also touch upon 2008's Batman the Brave and the Bold, and 2016's Justice League Action, where he also appeared but honestly wasn't all that significant. But I know that if I don't mention them, then some people will start shouting, claiming that I forgot them. So let's start with the BTAS episode Two-Face Part 1. I make no secret that I think that Two-Face Part 1 is the best episode hands down. It's one of the most mature stories, but it's never gratuitous. And while it may take a simplified approach to the complex mental health condition dissociative identity disorder, it's still effective. Part of the reason why the story works so well is down to the fact that Harvey Dent was an established character, ironically appearing in 2 episodes before becoming Two-Face. I'd love to say that was intentional, but it seems more like it was a result of tight deadlines more than anything else. If they'd had more time to get episodes made, I'm sure they would have used him more. As well as giving Two-Face a striking black and white suit, his backstory was also reinvented. Harvey Dent had always struggled with his mental health as a result of childhood feelings of guilt. It was an innocuous enough event. He fought back against a childhood bully, and the bully ended up in the hospital with appendicitis. But still, it was enough to make young Harvey feel incredibly guilty, and he vowed to never show his anger again. And these negative feelings built up inside of him and festered until they manifested in the form of Big Bad Harv, his violent, aggressive alternate personality. Harvey had always been able to keep him under control, but the pressures of campaigning for his re-election and his attempts at ending Rupert Thorne's criminal empire were too much for him. When Thorne learned of Dent's secret, he attempted to blackmail him. At this point, Harvey retreated into his own mind, allowing Big Bad Harv to take over, and things got messy. In the struggle, Dent was caught in an explosion, burning half of his body. Upon seeing his new form, Big Bad Harv recoiled in horror, leaving behind a new identity, Two-Face. And I really love the subtle distinction that the late Richard Mole gave these different versions of Harvey Dent. His Harvey Dent has a firm and confident voice. Big Bad Harv has a menacing, snarling quality, and Two-Face lies somewhere in the middle, with a wide array of emotions but with a gravelly element. Despite being a new person, Two-Face shared the ambition of his alter Harvey Dent. He wanted to root out organised crime in Gotham. However, he also knew that as soon as they took one person out, someone else would rise up to take their place. So he decided that he would be that person. Two-Face targeted the organised gangs and fed information to his mole within the GCPD, Detective Gil Mason. With all these high-profile arrests, Mason ascended through the GCPD, and he was tipped to replace Commissioner Gordon, after Two-Face had framed Gordon for accepting bribes. So you could see his duality in that act. One side was cleaning up crime, the other side was corrupting the police department. He wasn't a generic bank robber. Every crime he committed served a purpose in his strategy. However, by the time of the new Batman adventures in 1997, Two-Face became more of a generic criminal. In Sins of the Father, he murdered Tim Drake's father and threatened to detonate a dirty bomb unless he was paid millions of dollars. Similarly, he committed robberies and sold his goods through the Penguin. So he had pretty much broken the deal with Harvey Dent. His crimes served no purpose other than lining his own pocket. But Harvey Dent was in no position to do anything about this, so he created an alternate personality, the Judge. I've talked at length about the beauty of a troubled lawyer turning to a faceless judge for help, and I've shared a link to that video in the info button above, so add that to your watch later list if the subject interests you. But a quick summary is that as the Judge, Dent tried to clean up Gotham with violence. He used similar extreme tactics to Two-Face, but in the name of good. We see him brutalize villains like the Penguin, Killer Croc and the Riddler, but his real aim is to kill Two-Face. The Judge doesn't seem to know that he is Two-Face and vice versa. However, the revelation causes his mind to break, and we last see Two-Face sitting in Arkham, putting himself on trial in his own mind. The DCAU Two-Face made a final appearance in 2016's Justice League vs. the Fatal Five as one of the patients in Arkham, and it was kind of sad to see that after years of treatment, Dent was still struggling. Two-Face skipped over 2004's The Batman. Although they had wanted to use him, DC Comics imposed the Bat Embargo, as it was colloquially called, that prevented most Batman characters from appearing in multiple shows and movies. Two-Face was going to feature prominently in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, so he was off limits in animation. However, this was no longer an issue by the time of 2008's Batman the Brave and the Bold. This show was more of a spotlight for the different heroes of the DC universe, with the villains mostly acting as set dressing. Their Two-Face was very faithful to the Golden Age of Comics version, complete with his green face, purple and orange bisected suit, and double-headed coin. He was obsessed with the number 2 and decided every action on the flip of a coin. And in the opening section of one episode, he teamed up with Batman to take out his own henchman because the coin came up on the good side, highlighting the absurdity of the character, which I really liked. While he wasn't all that prominent in The Brave and the Bold, 2013's Beware the Batman used Harvey Dent really well in the latter half of the season. There, Harvey Dent appeared in multiple episodes and he ran as Mayor of Gotham on an anti-Batman platform. Hell, he was against any costume vigilantes full stop. As part of his crusade, he formed a dedicated unit, the Special Crimes Unit, to combat vigilantes and supercriminals. These heavily armed soldiers were trained to shoot first and ask questions later, with their massive arsenal of advanced weapons. Any rational person would see how problematic that was, but Dent chose to downplay how dangerous they were. He wasn't particularly sympathetic either. He was driven, focused, and selfish. When Deathstroke impersonated Batman to try to kill Bruce Wayne, Dent made the story all about himself and how his life was also in danger. Potentially. Despite these obvious personality flaws, or perhaps because of them, he was very successful as a politician and looked set to become Gotham's next mayor. The interesting thing is that it was Dent's pursuit of Batman that led to his disfigurement. He thought he was being heroic, rescuing one of his men, Dane Lislow, an anagram of Slade Wilson, from Batman. However, he was caught in a detonation of the weapons inside of his own armory, which is doubly ironic. And it's a shame that we only got one season of the show because Dent became Two-Face near the end of the season, but we never saw his new faces. His entire face was wrapped in bandages, a very nice visual callback to Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, in which Two-Face's face was repaired, but in his mind, he was still Two-Face. Their Two-Face wasn't all that interested in chance or luck, and he didn't even have a coin. He was brutal in his pursuit of his objectives. It was less about mental illness, although there were hints of it, and more about anger at and revenge for the perceived injustice of his injury. Dent was not a good person, but he thought of himself as one. His injury was a result of his blind ambition and relentless pursuit of Batman. It was almost a punishment for his hubris and arrogance. But he couldn't see that, and instead, the pain he caused himself drove him over the edge. After his accident, Dent pulled out of the race for mayor and became a behind-the-scenes figure, intimidating his rival to also pull out, and getting the new mayor to declare martial law and deploy the SCU to murder Batman. The sad thing was that Dent was just a secondary player in Deathstroke's grand scheme. But there was a nice tease in the final episode with Dent walking away, unravelling his bandages, saying he was no longer interested in being mayor. I would have loved to have seen a second season, but it was not to be. Now, it'd be remiss of me not to briefly mention 2016's Justice League Action, because Two-Face does appear in that show. Much like The Brave and the Bold, Justice League Action was mostly about the heroes of the show, with the villains acting as the drivers of the plot. They took the idea of Dent's split personality literally, with the two versions of Dent talking to each other and often arguing, which was an interesting approach. The next show to prominently feature Two-Face was 2020's Harley Quinn, and they built upon what had come previously in Beware the Batman by making their Harvey Dent deeply unlikable and thoroughly corrupt. He was two-faced even before his accident, a stereotypical crooked politician who would lie directly to your face and only cared about furthering his own career. When the Joker planted a bomb somewhere in Gotham, Dent insisted that the case had to be dealt with before the polls closed, for fear he'd lose the election. So it's ironic then that his villain name has a double meaning. As both Dent and Two-Face, he would lie to pretty much everyone, but spoke in such a friendly and confident way that people would be willing to believe him, even when his lies were blatant. Two-Face was a prominent member of the Rogues Gallery of Gotham City, and tried to capitalise on the power vacuum after Gotham was decimated, but he was no match for Harley and her gang. And true to form, he played both sides of the field, acting as a criminal overlord, and also tried to help the inept Jim Gordon to become mayor of Gotham. However, he sabotaged Gordon as much as he helped him. I like this take on him, even if it is a bit one note. It's not about his mental illness, he's just a selfish, duplicitous bastard. This leads to the latest series to feature Two-Face, Batman, Cape Crusader. Funnily enough, Cape Crusader takes a similar approach to Beware the Batman, with Harvey Dent being a sleazy district attorney with aspirations of becoming mayor of Gotham. On the corruption scale, he's probably on the lower end, more someone that made deals to further his power and influence. At least until a campaign event got robbed by the Gentleman Ghost, and Dent's inaction saw his popularity plummet. At this point, he gave in to temptation and accepted money from mobster Rupert Thorne. Thorne would help turn things around for Dent on the condition that he drop charges against one of his men who had swindled citizens out of their life savings. This was a step too far for Dent, who dramatically turned on Thorne and walked away with the money. This could not stand, and so Dent was attacked with acid, bringing an end to his political career. This injury and the shame and embarrassment of being a victim, believing that people were staring at him and talking behind his back, caused his fragile mind to snap. He was deeply traumatized, much in the same way that Batman had been traumatized when he witnessed his parents' murder, and he had a similar response. He sought to punish those that had wronged him, although where Batman was comparatively measured in his crusade, breaking bones and sending people to prison, Dent committed murder. And I like how Dent used the two-headed coin to give the illusion of chance. He always called heads as the outcome he wanted, often the slightly milder option, 20 years in prison as opposed to the death penalty, or calling the cops instead of murdering a mugger. It gave the perception of chance, but really, he was in control. Unlike earlier versions of the character, it was the pristine side of his face that represented his dark side, the person that had lost everything. He was still charming and amiable, but went on a murderous crusade to avenge himself. All of his inhibitions had seemingly worn away, and his patience was limited. His scar side was more reclusive and soft-spoken. This other guy, as Dent called him, blamed himself for the situation and felt guilt for all of the crimes he had committed over the years. Perhaps this was a fitting punishment for all of their bad deeds, he pondered. After being caught by Batman, Dent was persuaded to testify to the corruption in Gotham, but he wouldn't make it to trial. Despite the best efforts of Batman, Commissioner Gordon, Barbara Gordon, and Renee Montoya, he wound up getting shot in the gut, and then in the back when the other guy shielded Barbara. When asked why he had sacrificed himself to save her, a confused Dent responded,
"Damned if I know. Barbara,"
before passing away. So one of the cool things about this version of Two-Face is that he was a parallel to Batman. He showed Batman what could happen if he remained isolated, focusing only on revenge. Batman would wind up dead in some alley somewhere someday with a bullet in his back. He showed Batman that he wasn't an island, that he needed other people, and that there was more to his crusade than punishing the wicked. It was also about saving people. I find it really fascinating how, after Batman the Animated Series redefined Two-Face, every other version of him went in a different direction. From the more comic book accurate Two-Face of Batman the Brave and the Bold, and to a lesser extent Justice League Action, to the detestable corrupt politician of Beware the Batman and Harley Quinn. Cape Crusader seems to take a middle ground. Somewhat sympathetic. He did seem to be sincere in his attempts to clean up Gotham, and was willing to testify to what he knew before he was murdered. But ultimately, in my mind, it doesn't really get much better than the original BTAS take on the character. That probably won't surprise anyone given that I watched this show in my formative years. But I adored their take on the character, and I completely understand why later shows didn't want to repeat the same thing. Two-Face Part 1 is undeniably one of the best episodes of BTAS. It's my favourite episode, which I've talked about at length. And I agree with the view that there's no point in retreading old ground, and if you can't top it, there's little point in trying to compete in the same arena. It's one of the things that drove both Beware the Batman and Batman Cape Crusader, finding new ways to present established villains like Two-Face, while also shining the spotlight on lesser-known characters such as Professor Pig and the Gentleman Ghost. In closing, I just wanted to say that just because I prefer the BTAS version over all of the others, it doesn't mean that any of them are somehow inferior. I think we can all agree that Two-Face is consistently handled very well in all of these Batman shows. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time, I want to follow up on something that I mentioned in this video. It'll be my last video of the year, and we're going to go out by looking at the most overlooked Batman cartoon, Beware the Batman, and how its philosophy was very similar to Batman Cape Crusaders. Hope to see you then.